The heat rippled across the horizon, distorting the jagged silhouettes of distant rock formations. Terrace was a world that had never known mercy, a planet where the sun burned with relentless fury and the wind carried whispers of death. The southern ridges stretched like the spine of some ancient beast, their peaks cutting into the amber sky like teeth. Cassia moved across the landscape with practiced silence, her blue skin darkened by years under the unforgiving sun. The fine network of scars that decorated her arms, pale azure against deep cobalt, told stories of hunts and battles, of monsters subdued and enemies vanquished. Her eyes, sharp as obsidian shards, scanned the terrain with predatory focus. Those eyes had earned her respect across 3 territories. They missed nothing, forgave less. She adjusted her grip on Whisper of the Dunes, her legendary spear. The weapon was an extension of her body, a masterpiece of metallurgy that combined lightness with lethal precision. Its blade, tempered in the heart of a meteor and infused with elements found only in the deepest caverns of Taris, could pierce the hide of any creature that roamed these lands. The shaft was wrapped in leather harvested from her first kill, now worn smooth from years of use. It bore intricate etchings, each mark a memorial to a significant hunt. Cassia was not merely respected, she was feared. From poachers who dared to hunt the protected crystal lizards of the eastern flats, to mercenaries who crossed boundaries they had no business crossing. All knew her reputation. She had never been wounded in combat, never missed when she chose to kill. Her name was invoked to frighten children into obedience. Be good, or the Blue Hunter will come. But that day, everything changed. She had been tracking unusual activity along the southwestern border of her territory for 3 days. Unfamiliar footprints, displaced rocks, the subtle indicators that someone or something had breached the natural boundary of the Krell Canyon. When she spotted the figure kneeling beside the rare desert spring, one of only 7 known water sources in this region, a cold anger filled her veins. Water was more precious than blood on Terrace. To find a stranger helping himself to her spring was an insult she could not ignore. The intruder appeared human, a rarity in this part of the galaxy. His skin was weathered bronze, his hair tied back in utilitarian fashion. Though he wore no visible armor, a long steel blade was strapped across his back, its hilt protruding over his right shoulder. He seemed defenseless otherwise, cupping water to his lips with bare hands as dust-laden wind tugged at his worn clothing. Cassia's muscles tensed. She moved with the silence of a desert ghost, positioning herself on an outcropping above the spring. The stranger continued to drink, unaware. She struck without warning, her body cutting through the air in a controlled dive, spear extended before her. The attack should have ended with her weapon embedded in the intruder's back, a quick, efficient kill. But something impossible happened. The stranger turned, just in time, as if some primal instinct had warned him. In a fluid motion that seemed impossibly fast, he drew the sword from his back and met her attack midair. The clash of metal against metal sent a shockwave across the desert. Nearby rock lizards scattered into crevices. Dust particles suspended in the air seemed to freeze for a heartbeat before dispersing in violent spirals. Cassia launched into a whirlwind of strikes. Her body twisted and pivoted with the precise, lethal grace of a sandstorm. Each attack flowed into the next, techniques perfected through decades of combat, but the stranger defended like a wall, immovable, patient, reading her movements with uncanny perception. His blade moved with economic precision, deflecting rather than meeting force with force. Then came the moment that would haunt Cassia's dreams. The stranger sidestepped with her most devastating combination, a feint followed by a low sweep transitioning into an upward thrust, and in one sudden, terrible motion, brought his sword down upon her spear. The sound was sickening, like bones breaking, like trust shattering. Whisper of the Dunes, the unconquerable, the legendary, split in 2. Cassia fell backward, her balance destroyed along with her weapon. Her hands clutched the broken pieces as her mind struggled to process what had just happened. She felt naked, vulnerable, a sensation she had forgotten could exist. The stranger stood over her, his breathing controlled despite the intensity of their exchange. His sword remained drawn but lowered, the tip pointing to the ground rather than her throat. His eyes, a strange amber color flecked with gold, studied her with something that wasn't quite mercy, something more calculating. "Get it over with," Cassia growled, her voice harsh from dust and rage. "You want blood? Take it." "No," he said. His voice was unexpectedly soft, tinged with an accent she couldn't place. "I want answers." Cassia's camp was nestled in a natural hollow where three massive rock formations converged, providing shelter from the worst of Taris's sandstorms. The settlement consisted of a dozen dwellings crafted from a combination of local stone, heat-resistant fabrics, and salvaged materials. Gardens of desert-adapted plants grew in specially constructed beds, their precious moisture protected by translucent covers. Children trained with miniature spears in a central clearing, supervised by elders whose blue skin had faded to a pale azure with age. This had been Cassia's home for all 36 cycles of her life. She knew every face, every story, every strength and weakness of her clan. So when she returned, broken spear in hand and a stranger at her back, she expected outrage, demands for explanation, perhaps even a challenge from younger warriors eager to prove themselves where she had failed. Instead, there was only silence. Children ceased their training. Elders looked away. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. "What happened here?" Cassia demanded, her voice carrying across the hollow. "Where is Marin? Where is Jal?" No one answered. Eyes averted, bodies turned away. Trig, her oldest friend and the clan's weapon maker, approached with hesitant steps. His hands, normally sure and strong, trembled slightly. "Cassia," he said, his voice low, "you've been gone 3 days." "Hunting the northern ridge," she replied sharply, "as I told the council. Now explain this silence, and why this outsider was at our spring." Trig's gaze flickered to the broken spear, then to the human who stood a respectful distance behind her. Something like shame crossed his features. "You should speak with the elders," he muttered. "I demand to speak with the elders," Cassia hissed, pushing past him toward the largest dwelling at the back of the settlement. The structure was adorned with the skulls of great beasts and tokens from successful hunts, many of which she had contributed herself. Inside, 5 elders sat in a semicircle around a small fire pit where blue flames danced without heat, a tradition meant to symbolize the enduring spirit of their people. Cassia had always respected these leaders, these keepers of history and wisdom. Now, seeing the resignation in their ancient faces, she felt something crack inside her chest. "What have you done?" she asked, her voice deadly quiet as she placed the 2 pieces of her broken spear before them. Elder Nima, her hair white as bone and skin creased with centuries of survival, spoke first. "We made a choice, Daughter of Dawn," she said, using Cassia's ceremonial title. "Without consulting your greatest warrior?" "Because you are our greatest warrior," said Elder Vex, his voice like stones grinding together. "Because you would have fought." "Tell me," Cassia demanded. And then came the confession, whispered like poison by Elder Nima, whose voice had once sung Cassia to sleep as a child. "The land's been sold. Lord Saren owns it now. We're tenants." The word struck harder than any physical blow. Cassia staggered back, her mind reeling. "He bought it?" she spat. "A tyrant doesn't buy. He threatened it from you." "We had no choice," Elder Vex said, spreading his weathered hands. "His forces grow stronger each season. Those who defied him—" "There's always a choice," she hissed, cutting him off. "You chose fear." "We chose survival," countered Elder Nima. "For the children, for our future." "What future?" Cassia gestured toward the entrance. "As slaves? As beggars on our own land?" The human had followed her inside, standing silently in the shadows. Now he stepped forward. "Your people aren't the first to face this choice," he said. "Saren's pattern is consistent across 3 solar systems." The elder started, apparently noticing him for the first time. "Who is this outsider?" demanded Elder Vex. "Someone who broke my spear," Cassia said flatly, "and who apparently knows more about our situation than I was permitted to." "My name is Ed Har," the human said, inclining his head respectfully to the elders. "I was part of a survey team sent to map the mineral deposits in the Western Expanse." "Survey team?" Elder Nima's eyes narrowed. "From which authority?" The Galactic Resource Commission, Ed replied. An independent body. We don't represent any government or corporate interest. And where is this team now? Cassia asked, turning to face him fully. A shadow passed across Ed's features. Dead. Saren's mercenaries ambushed our camp. I'm the only survivor. Why would Saren target surveyors? Elder Vex asked. Because we found something valuable under this desert, Ed said. Something worth killing for. Resources? Cassia asked. Minerals? Fuel deposits? No, Ed said, meeting her gaze steadily. Freedom. We discovered evidence that this entire region was falsely classified as uninhabitable in official records. The documentation showing indigenous habitation, your people's claim to this land, was deliberately buried. By Saren? By someone working for him with the right documentation, your claim supersedes his purchase. He can't control free people with legal standing. Silence filled the dwelling as the implications sank in. Cassia looked from Ed to the elders and back again. Why should we believe you? She finally asked. You shouldn't, Ed replied. Not without proof. But consider this. I could have killed you at the spring. I didn't. A mistake you'll regret, she said, but there was less venom in her voice now. Perhaps, he acknowledged, but I'm more interested in stopping Saren than fighting potential allies. Cassia's mind raced. This human, this outsider with his strange accent and stranger claims, represented an unknown quantity. Yet there was something in his direct gaze, something in the way he had fought, honorably despite his advantage, that resonated with her. Tell me everything you know about Saren, she said. Not here, Ed replied, glancing at the elders. Some ears might be compromised. Cassia's hand moved to the knife at her belt. Choose your next words carefully, human. Saren doesn't just bring weapons, Ed said calmly. He brings bribes, promises, threats against family members. I've seen it on 3 worlds now. Someone here is likely already reporting to him. The painful truth of his words struck Cassia like a physical blow. She looked at the elders, people she had trusted all her life, and for the first time she saw them as potentially dangerous. Where then? She asked. The spring, Ed suggested. At sunrise. Cassia nodded curtly, then addressed the elders. This isn't finished. Whatever you've agreed to, whatever you've signed, it can be undone. Child, Elder Nima began, reaching toward her. I am not a child, Cassia said, her voice cold as she gathered the pieces of her broken spear. I am the one who will fix what you have broken. She strode from the dwelling, her back rigid with anger and purpose. As the flap closed behind her, she heard Ed's voice, surprisingly gentle. Your leaders made the best choice they could with the information they had. Remember that before you judge them too harshly. She didn't respond, but something in her, some small, quiet part that wasn't consumed by rage, acknowledged the wisdom in his words. Dawn on Terrace came suddenly, a violent eruption of light that transformed the landscape from shadowed mystery to stark reality in moments. The spring, nestled among wind-sculpted rocks, caught the first rays and reflected them in fractured patterns across the stone. Cassia arrived before first light, checking the area for surveillance devices or hidden observers. She found nothing, but her instincts remained on high alert. The broken halves of Whisper of the Dunes were bound to her back, a reminder of failure she refused to discard. Ed appeared as the sun cleared the horizon, moving with the same quiet efficiency she had noted during their fight. He carried a small pack in his sword, but otherwise traveled light. You came alone, he observed. As did you, she replied. Trust has to start somewhere. Cassia gestured to a flat rock beside the spring. Talk. Ed sat, arranging his sword across his knees. Lord Saren isn't just a warlord. He represents a consortium of interests that specializes in resource extraction on frontier worlds. We have no valuable resources, Cassia said. Terrace is mostly rock and heat. That's what makes this unusual, Ed agreed. Normally, Saren targets worlds with obvious wealth, minerals, rare gases, unique organics. Here, he's operating differently. How so? He's deployed greenskin mercenaries in segmented armor, warriors bred specifically for obedience and brutality. They're expensive, too expensive for a routine land grab. Cassia frowned. I've seen these greenskins in the distance, moving in formation across the dunes. They're called Sarathi, genetically engineered soldiers with enhanced strength and limited emotional capacity. Sarin only deploys them for high-priority operations, which suggests that whatever he wants here is worth far more than what shows on standard surveys. Cassia considered this. What happened to your team, Mom? A shadow crossed Ed's face. We were documenting indigenous land usage patterns, creating a case for your people's prior claim. Sarin's forces attacked at night. Professional, targeted. They weren't interested in our equipment, only our data and our lives. And you escaped? Barely. I was away from the main camp, tracking migration patterns of local fauna for our environmental impact assessment. Cassia's eyes narrowed. You're not just a surveyor. Ed met her gaze steadily. I was military before this, special operations for the Outer Rim Coalition. A soldier turned scientist? Skepticism colored her voice. A soldier who saw too many worlds like this one, Ed corrected. Indigenous populations displaced by corporate interests, resources stripped, environments destroyed. I wanted to stop fighting symptoms and address causes. Noble, Cassia said, not entirely without sarcasm. Practical, Ed countered. What happens here will happen elsewhere unless the pattern is broken. Cassia stood, pacing restlessly. So you have knowledge. I have fighting skills. Neither of us has power or numbers. What exactly do you propose? First, we confirm what Sarin is really after. Then we disrupt his operation while I try to re-establish contact with my organization. And if we can't, then we make enough trouble that continuing here costs more than Sarin is willing to pay. Cassia laughed, a harsh sound with little humor. Against Sarathi troops? With what army? Not an army, Ed said. A resistance. Your people may have surrendered officially, but I doubt every one of them is happy about it. There will be others, people displaced by Sarin's expansion, survivors from other settlements, even deserters from his forces. You sound like you've done this before. Similar situations, different worlds. Ed stood, facing her directly. I won't lie to you, Cassia. This won't be easy or clean. People will die, but doing nothing means watching everything your ancestors built disappear. Cassia stared at him, measuring his words against her instincts. She had been betrayed once already, by her own elders. Trust didn't come easily. And yet, why should I believe you are not working for Sarin? She asked. This could be an elaborate trap to identify potential rebels. A fair question, Ed acknowledged. He reached into his pack and withdrew a small device. With a flick of his thumb, it projected a holographic display, images of green-skinned Sarathi soldiers executing kneeling civilians. The timestamp showed it was recorded just 14 days earlier. This is what happened to the Marak clan when they refused Sarin's purchase offer, Ed said quietly. 300 people. Men, women, children. No survivors. Cassia watched in silence, her face hardening with each image. When the projection ended, she spoke. Not for revenge, she said firmly. Not for pride or power. No, Ed agreed, for justice. For every voice that has been silenced. Cassia extended her arm, blue skin gleaming in the morning light. We have nothing in common, Edhar, except a common enemy. Ed clasped her forearm in the traditional warrior's grip of her people. Sometimes that's enough. The pact was sealed not with ceremony, but with purpose. They started small. A supply caravan carrying the water purifiers and ammunition was their first target. With only Cassia, Ed, and 3 young hunters who had secretly joined their cause, they struck at dusk when the desert heat began to subside. Cassia moved like a shadow across the dunes, her knowledge of the terrain allowing her to position herself perfectly above the narrow pass where the caravan would be forced to slow. Ed circled to the rear, where security would likely be lightest. The caravan appeared, 6 heavy transport vehicles with armored cabs and 2 escort vehicles at front and rear. Sarin's insignia, a stylized gauntlet clutching a sun, was emblazoned on their sides. Cassia gave the signal, a brief flash of reflected light. Simultaneously, she and her hunters launched their attack on the lead vehicles while Ed disabled the rear escort. The fight was brief but intense. The caravan guards, expecting no resistance in supposedly pacified territory, were unprepared for the coordinated assault. Within minutes, the supplies were redistributed into smaller containers that could be carried across the dunes, the vehicles disabled beyond easy repair. No lives were taken, a condition Ed had insisted upon for their first operation. "We're not murderers," he had explained. "Not yet. Each death makes it easier to justify the next. Besides, these are just hired transporters, not Sarathi troops." Cassia had reluctantly agreed, though her culture had fewer reservations about killing enemies. Still, she recognized the strategic value of his approach. Each guard left alive would carry tales of their efficiency, spreading unease through Saren's ranks. Back at their makeshift base, a network of abandoned mining tunnels beneath the western ridge, they celebrated their small victory. "First blood," said Naren, the youngest of the hunters who had joined them. His scales still had the bright cyan sheen of youth. "Saren will know we exist now. And respond accordingly," Ed cautioned him. "We've bought attention. Now we need to be smarter, more careful." "We need more fighters," Cassia said. 3 hunters and 2 leaders won't win this war." "Then we'll get more," Ed replied. "There are displaced people all across the southern territories. Some will join if they believe there's a chance." Over the following weeks, their operation expanded carefully. Ed taught Cassia's hunters guerrilla tactics, how to strike and disappear, how to use the enemy's size and structure against them. Cassia shared her intimate knowledge of the desert, how to move without leaving tracks, how to find water in seemingly barren terrain, how to predict the deadly sandstorms that could provide cover or death. They sabotaged Saren's watchtowers, structures rising from the dunes that served as surveillance and communication points. They intercepted coded transmissions, gradually building a picture of Saren's operation and intentions. Most importantly, they spread word among the displaced, those who had lost homes and land, to Saren's expansion. Some came to join them, bringing skills, weapons, and intelligence. An engineer who had worked on Saren's terraforming equipment before being discarded as redundant. A physician whose clinic had been commandeered as a military installation. Hunters and trackers from various clans, each with their own reasons to hate the warlord. By the 3rd month, their resistance numbered nearly 60 fighters, a small force but growing. Their base expanded into a network of interconnected tunnels and caverns, with sleeping quarters, a medical station, and a command center where Ed and Cassia plotted their next moves. But Saren was not idle. His response came suddenly and brutally. A settlement that had provided food and intelligence to the resistance was burned to the ground. 23 civilians executed, their bodies left in the central square as a warning. When Cassia saw the aftermath, something inside her hardened. The blue in her eyes seemed to deepen to midnight as she knelt beside the body of a child no more than 7 cycles old. "This ends," she said, her voice deadly calm. "The next blood spilled will be Saren's." Ed stood beside her, his own expression grim. "We're not ready for a direct confrontation." "We're ready enough," she countered. Their first lethal operation targeted a patrol of Sarathi troops, 6 green-skinned soldiers moving in formation across the eastern flats. Cassia led the attack herself, wielding a new spear crafted by Trigg from the remains of Whisper of the Dunes and reinforced with metal salvaged from Saren's own vehicles. The Sarathi fought with programmed precision, effective but predictable. Cassia moved like wind, her new weapon a blur as she struck vital points with unerring accuracy. Ed covered her with precisely aimed shots from a captured pulse rifle, his military training evident in every movement. When it was over, 6 green bodies lay motionless on the sand. Cassia wiped emerald blood from her spear. "First blood." She echoed Nirina's earlier words. "Real blood." Ed didn't respond immediately, checking the bodies for intelligence and useful equipment. Finally, he straightened. "This changes things," he said. "Saren will escalate further." "Good," Cassia replied. "Let him come into the open where we can see him." "Be careful what you wish for," Ed warned. He was right to be concerned. Saren's retaliation was swift and terrible. Entire villages with suspected ties to the resistance were burned, hostages taken, public executions broadcasted across the settlement communication networks. Some of their allies turned informants, either broken by torture or swayed by promises of safety. Cassia was ambushed during what should have been a routine reconnaissance. 4 Sarathi with specialized weapons lying in wait. She escaped, but barely. with a wound that nearly gutted her. Ed was captured once, subjected to interrogation techniques that left permanent scars across his back. He escaped through a combination of opportunity and sheer determination, killing 3 guards in the process. The war wasn't noble. It wasn't glorious. It was dirty, desperate survival. Each mission brought death. Each betrayal brought fire. Their numbers fluctuated as some joined while others fell or fled. Yet somehow, in the midst of this brutal conflict, something unexpected developed between Cassia and Ned. Not romance. There was no place for such softness in their reality. Rather, a bond forged in blood and battle, in shared purpose and pain. They learned to anticipate each other's movements in combat, to communicate with glances and gestures. They argued strategy with passionate intensity, neither yielding until the best approach was found. They tended each other's wounds in silence, knowing that words were inadequate for what they witnessed daily. They became something beyond allies, beyond friends, warriors without a home, fighting for those who could no longer fight for themselves. And slowly, impossibly, they began to win. Small victories accumulated, territory reclaimed. Sauron's forces stretched thin across too much hostile land. Intelligence gathered from captured communications revealed Sauron's growing frustration and his plan to end the resistance once and for all. He's bringing his mobile fortress, Ed explained during an emergency war council. Their command center had been relocated 3 times in the past month due to security concerns. It's a walking battle platform with enough firepower to level mountain ranges. We've heard rumors of this fortress, said Vela, a former tracker who had become one of their most reliable lieutenants. Many believe it's a myth. It's real, Ed insisted. I've seen it in operation on Karis Prime. Nothing survived in its path. Then we avoid it, suggested Trigg, who had joined the resistance despite his age. Let it pass and strike elsewhere. Cassia shook her head. According to these communications, Sauron's heading for the eastern line. If he reaches it, reinforcements, Ed finished grimly. The eastern line has a direct transport link to Sauron's primary base of operations. Once he establishes a foothold there, he can bring in enough troops to make our resistance impossible. So we stop him before he reaches it, Cassia said simply. The command tent fell silent as the implications sank in. You're talking about a direct assault on Sauron's fortress, Vela said slowly. That's suicide. Yes, Cassia agreed, unflinching. It probably is. Ed studied the tactical display projected onto the rough stone table. Not necessarily, he said finally. Not if we use everything we have. Not if we're willing to risk everything. They spent 3 days planning, gathering every fighter, every weapon, every piece of intelligence they could muster. In the end, they had 53 combat-ready individuals, a motley collection of hunters, displaced civilians, and a handful of deserters from Sauron's own forces. We split into strike teams, Ed explained during the final briefing, each with a specific objective. Cassia and I will lead the front assault, a direct attack on the main gate. The most dangerous position, Vela observed. The most visible, Ed corrected. We need Sauron to focus his defenses forward while secondary teams target the power systems and communication arrays. And if you fail, asked Trigg, his old hands busy coating blades with poison harvested from desert scorpions. Then others will continue, Cassia said firmly. This isn't about us. It never was. The night before the assault, Cassia found Ed standing alone on a rocky outcropping, staring at the 3 moons of Taris as they cast overlapping shadows across the desert. Second thoughts? She asked, coming to stand beside him. Practical assessments, he replied. Our chances are slim. They always were, Ed nodded. I've been fighting Sauron's kind for 15 years. Different names, same disease. Sometimes I wonder if anything really changes. It does for those we save, Cassia said. She gestured toward the distant lights of a small settlement, one of the few that had avoided Serene's attention. It matters to them. They stood in silence for a long moment, the weight of tomorrow's possibilities hanging between them. If we succeed, Ed said finally, what then? Cassia blinked, genuinely surprised by the question. I haven't thought beyond victory. Perhaps you should, Ed suggested. The hardest part of winning is what comes after. First we live. Cassia said firmly. Then we'll worry about how to live. Dawn revealed Saren's fortress on the horizon, a massive structure mounted on 6 articulated legs, each as tall as a dwelling. The central platform bristled with weapons emplacements and communication arrays. Saren's banner, the gauntlet in sun, flew from its highest point. The resistance fighters moved into position, each team carrying specialized equipment for their assigned tasks. Cassia and Ed led 20 fighters toward the front gate, a direct, seemingly reckless assault designed to draw attention and resources. Remember, Ed told them as they prepared for the final approach, we're not trying to overwhelm them with numbers. We're creating an opening for the other teams. Hold nothing back. Cassia adjusted her grip on her reforged spear. For those who can no longer speak, she said, repeating what had become their unofficial motto. For those who can no longer speak, the fighters echoed. The assault began. The fortress detected them when they were still half a kilometer out. Automated defense systems activated. Plasma turrets and sonic disruptors designed to incapacitate approaching forces. They had anticipated this. Vela's team activated jammers salvaged from Saren's own outposts, creating intermittent blind spots in the defensive grid. It wasn't perfect. 3 fighters fell in the first wave of fire, but it allowed the rest to close the distance. At 400 meters, Sarathi troops emerged from hatches along the fortress's lower level. Green-skinned and implacable, they advanced in perfect formation, pulse rifles ready. Cassia signaled the second phase. Fighters previously concealed in the sand rose up, engaging the Sarathi from unexpected angles. The disciplined formation fragmented as the green soldiers were forced to defend against attacks from multiple directions. Cassia and Ed used this distraction to lead their remaining force toward the main entrance, a massive armored door at the fortress's front. The fighting was brutal, hand-to-hand in many cases as the sides closed to melee range. Ed's sword moved with lethal precision, finding gaps in the Sarathi armor that no one else could spot. Cassia fought like a force of nature, her spear claiming lives with each thrust and sweep. But the defenders had numbers and position. For every Sarathi that fell, another emerged to take their place. Cassia's team was whittled down, 15 fighters, then 12, then 8. Still they pressed forward, reaching the outer wall of the fortress itself. Here they faced automatic defense turrets and heavily armored elite guards. The resistance fighters deployed their most precious resource, explosive charges fashioned from mining equipment and Saren's own weapons. The wall breached with a thunderous roar, creating an opening barely large enough for 2 people to enter side by side. Second team, go! Ed shouted. 4 fighters broke off, carrying equipment necessary for disabling the fortress's primary systems. They disappeared into the smoky interior. Cassia, Ed, and their remaining 4 fighters continued toward the main command center, fighting through corridors and up emergency stairwells. Twice they were nearly trapped by security bulkheads. Once they had to double back when a section collapsed. Whether by design or from battle damage was unclear. The fortress shuddered periodically, evidence that the other teams were succeeding in their objectives. Power fluctuated, emergency lighting casting everything in crimson shadows. They lost 2 more fighters clearing the level below Saren's war chamber. A third fell securing their retreat route. By the time they reached the final approach, only Cassia, Ed, and a single resistance fighter named Joro remained. You should go back, Cassia told Joro. Make sure our exit stays open. Joro, his scales dull with fatigue and blood, nodded grimly. For those who can no longer speak, he said, clasping both their arms before heading back the way they had come. Cassia and Ed faced the entrance to Saren's war chamber, a massive door emblazoned with the now familiar gauntlet and sun insignia. Whatever happens, Ed said quietly, it's been an honor. Cassia nodded, no words necessary between them now. With a final shared glance, they breached the door. Saren's war chamber was a stark contrast to the utilitarian corridors they had fought through. Luxurious furnishings surrounded a central command platform where holographic displays showed the status of the battle raging throughout the fortress. Artifacts from a dozen worlds decorated the walls, trophies of conquest. Lord Saren himself stood at the center of it all, wearing gold-trimmed armor that seemed almost ostentatious in its ornamentation. His face was sharply angular, his eyes the cold blue of distant stars. He appeared human, but the unnatural stillness of his features suggested extensive modification. 4 elite Sarathi guards flanked him, their weapons raised. Sarin didn't seem surprised by their arrival. He simply raised a crystal flask to his lips, taking a leisurely sip before speaking. "The Blue Hunter and the Human Surveyor," he said, his voice carrying an artificial resonance. "You've caused me considerable inconvenience." "We aim to cause more than inconvenience," Cassia replied, her spear at ready position. Sarin gestured dismissively. "You should have sold out like your elders, taken the generous compensation I offered. There was a place for someone with your skills in my organization." "There was a place for my people in their homes," Cassia countered, "before you drove them out." "Progress requires sacrifice," Sarin said. "Always has." Ed moved slightly to the left, positioning himself with careful precision. Cassia recognized the maneuver. They had practiced it countless times. A flanking setup that would allow them to attack from multiple angles simultaneously. "Your progress ends here," Ed said. Sarin sighed theatrically. "They all say something similar. The resistance on Palace 4, the indigenous coalition on Theros. Empty words before inevitable defeat." "They'll remember we didn't surrender," Cassia whispered, her voice carrying in the sudden silence. The attack came with explosive suddenness. Ed's sword cleaved through the first guard's defense, while Cassia's spear found the throat of another. The remaining Sarathi moved to protect their master, but the confined space worked against their numerical advantage. Sarin himself drew a weapon, an energy blade that hummed with deadly potential. He moved with surprising speed for someone who appeared more administrator than warrior, parrying Ed's follow-up attack with practiced ease. "Military training," Sarin observed. "Outer Rim Coalition, if I'm not mistaken. Special operations, judging by the technique." Ed didn't waste breath responding, pressing his attack with methodical precision. Each stroke tested Sarin's defense, searching for weakness. Cassia, meanwhile, engaged the remaining guards. Her reforged spear, crafted from the broken pieces of her legendary weapon, moved like an extension of her will. One Sarathi fell, emerald blood pooling beneath him. The last guard landed a glancing blow across her shoulder, drawing a line of cobalt blood. Sarin and Ed fought across the command platform, their blades creating a deadly light show as energy met steel with shower of sparks. Sarin was skilled, more so than they had anticipated, but Ed matched him move for move. "You think this ends with me?" Sarin asked, breathing heavily as they locked blades. "I represent interests that span systems, powers you can't begin to comprehend." "I don't care who you represent," Ed replied, breaking the lock with a sudden twist. "This world isn't yours to take." Cassia dispatched the final guard with a devastating combination, a feint followed by a sweeping strike that severed the Sarathi's leg, then a thrust through the chest as he fell. Bleeding from several wounds but still deadly focused, she moved to join Ed's fight. Sarin saw her approach and attempted a desperate gambit, a wide sweeping attack meant to force Ed back while he repositioned. But Ed had anticipated this, stepping inside the arc of the energy blade rather than retreating. Sarin's eyes widened in surprise as Ed's sword found the gap between chest and shoulder plates. The tyrant stumbled, his energy blade flickering as its power connection was severed. Cassia didn't hesitate. Though weakened from blood loss, she summoned her remaining strength and drove her shattered spear, the weapon that had been broken and reforged, like her people's spirit, directly into Sarin's heart. "For those who can no longer speak," she whispered as the light faded from his eyes. Sarin collapsed, his ornate armor clattering against the metal floor. The sound echoed through the chamber like a final announcement. The end of one era, the uncertain beginning of another. Ed and Cassia stood over their fallen enemy, both wounded, both exhausted beyond measure. "We need to move," Ed said after a moment. "The fortress will likely have automated protocols if Sarin is killed." Cassia nodded, retrieving her spear from Sarin's body. "The others? We'll find them on the way out." They made their way through the fortress, which was now in chaos. With Sarin dead and primary systems disabled, the remaining Sarathi troops seemed disoriented, some continuing to fight while others retreated or simply stood immobile, awaiting orders that would never come. They found survivors from other strike teams, fewer than they had hoped, but more than they had feared. Together, they fought their way clear of the fortress as its massive legs began to buckle. the once imposing structure slowly collapsing in on itself. From a safe distance, they watched as Saren's mobile command center, the symbol of his power and reach, became a twisted mass of metal on the desert floor. "It's really over," said Vela, one of the few team leaders who had survived. "This part is," Ed replied, his expression somber as he surveyed their diminished forces. "There will be power vacuums, opportunists, Saren's backers seeking revenge." "Let them come," Cassia said, leaning on her spear. Her wounds had been hastily bandaged, but she stood straight despite the pain. "They'll find we're not as easily conquered as they believed." The news spread across Terrace like wildfire. Saren was dead, his fortress destroyed, his forces in disarray. Settlements that had bowed under his rule cautiously reclaimed their independence. Displaced people began to return to abandoned homelands. The green-skinned Sarathi, without their master's control and payment, mostly departed on the next available transport, seeking new employers or, in some cases, the freedom to determine their own fate. 3 months after the fall of the fortress, a gathering was called. Representatives from every clan and settlement across the southern territories converged on the ancient meeting grounds, a natural amphitheater formed by wind-carved stone. Cassia and Ed stood before them, still bearing the scars of their final battle. Elder Nima, who had survived the conflict despite her age, spoke first. "The clans have met in council. We have determined that new leadership is needed for these uncertain times." Murmurs rippled through the assembled crowd. "The scattered clans, the survivors, the exiles, all have voted," Elder Nima continued. "Cassia Bluehunter and Ed Har, you are named not as rulers, but as guardians, protectors of a free land." Ceremonial robes were brought forward, deep blue for Cassia, embroidered with the pattern of her clan, earth and brown for Ed, marked with symbols representing both his human heritage and his adopted home. "Do you accept this responsibility?" Elder Vex asked formally. Cassia and Ed exchanged a glance before responding in unison. "We do." The new guardians wasted no time implementing changes. Their first act was to outlaw land sales by force or coercion. Their second was to establish training programs for defenders in every settlement. Their third was to begin rebuilding what had been lost: homes, communities, trust. When traders arrived from neighboring systems, wary of the change in power, they found not a war-torn wasteland, but a society in determined reconstruction. Cassia negotiated fair exchange rates for terrorist goods and resources. Ed established communication with off-world allies who could provide technological assistance without exploitation. It wasn't perfect. There were disputes, setbacks, occasional violence. Some questioned the authority of a blue-skinned hunter and an off-world human. Others warned of Saren's powerful backers, who would surely seek revenge. But when new threats emerged, as they inevitably did, they faced not isolated settlements, but a united people. And at the forefront of every defense stood two figures who had become living legends: the woman with the reforged spear and the man with the unbreakable sword. Not as enemies, not as strangers, but as guardians bound by battle, by loyalty, by a shared vision of freedom. For they had learned the most important lesson of their struggle. Some things, once broken, could be reforged stronger than before.
I hope you enjoyed this thrilling journey. On a scale of 1 to 10, how would you rate this story? Let me know in the comments below. Your feedback inspires more epic tales.